Did Star Trek and Orville just Freaky Friday? Welcome back, it's another week and a lot has happened this week because not only do we have a new episode of Strange New Worlds, Spock Amok, finally, after a very long time, a season premiere of Orville New Horizons with a new budget from a new production agency. Let's see how this goes. I want to talk about both of these episodes in this video because not only do I not have a lot of time, but there are a lot of things to discuss here in the way these two shows relate to one another, and I think it's really important that we get into that. Now, before we go any further with this, the whole versus thing, there is no versus. This is amazing that we have a fantastic episode of Orville, a fantastic episode of Star Trek. I just finished the mid-season finale of Stranger Things last night. I stayed up way too late. What a time to be alive. These things aren't in competition with one another. They are complementary to one another. They're all working and building on this whole genre of modern sci-fi and fantasy, and it is fantastic that we have such high quality productions when in the past, a lot of the stuff was a lot cheaper. I love the direction everything is going right now, so let's jump into it. First, we're gonna start out with my thoughts on both of these two episodes real quick. Number 1, Strange New Worlds, Episode 5, Spock Amok. This was a slightly uncharacteristic episode, especially given the history of the overt seriousness of New Trek. This time, they let their guards down, have a little fun. This is not the first time we have seen a fun or slightly silly episode in Star Trek, but honestly, I have to say this is probably one of the better executed silly episodes of Star Trek. First of all, of course, there are going to be tons of spoilers in this video, so don't watch it until you've watched what you're going to watch. We start out with a classic body swap trope. We've seen this in Star Trek before, we've seen this in lots of places before. This one in some ways is a more plausible aspect because we've seen Vulcans move their Katras around before. Sure, it seems far-fetched, but this thing happens, just ask McCoy. And one of the things that I appreciate the most about this is that they don't keep the whole thing a secret. Spock almost immediately tells Captain Pike, he tells Chapel, he tells the people that he confides in because it makes no sense for him to hide it from everyone. Where the classic trope of this setup is that I can't tell anyone. Why? Who knows? You're in space, you're on a sci-fi TV show, you see weird stuff, they're gonna get it. And so we don't get all tangled up in that whole mess. Instead, we just have an episode about prejudices and about learning and growing. Now, I'm not saying this is the best episode that I've seen, but it was way better than I thought it would be. From the trailer, I thought it was gonna be a lot sillier, but they tend to play it pretty subdued. Overall, it is an episode with very low stakes, which I am fine with, and it is very well executed. We have diplomacy, we have relationships, and I like how the writers of the show have now taken to creating mini bottle episodes with individual characters paired with one another that they can play off of each other and learn and grow and find out more about the characters. This is fantastic because when you're in a big group, sometimes it's hard to create those distinctions in characters. This is one of the issues that I had with a lot of characterizations in Discovery and Picard. Sometimes when you have a group of people, people are saying things just because the writers want someone to say something, not because it has anything to do with someone's character. And so this is great. They're actually isolating and playing on characters in this episode as much as possible. With regards to the body swap, swapping two Vulcans is problematic because they are not as distinctive as characters. When you have two, everyday quirky people in a TV show, you can create sort of caricatures of those that the other person can play so that it becomes more convincing. But when it's Vulcans, it's got to be very nuanced and it's hard to do. They did a decent job of it, but overall, that's a rough time. Like, you would more imagine like Spock and Nurse Chapel doing a body swap and then, big time hijinks. But they didn't take the easy way out with this. It was a much harder, more nuanced approach. We have La'an and Una growing closer together in this, and we have Chapel and Ortegas growing closer in this. Have a little bit of fun with M'Benga, but I know we need to pay more attention to this character, and we will get there. Because at some point, there's going to be an episode all about M'Benga, and so I feel like they're kind of saving that moment for him. It is coming. So overall, I'm going to give this episode a strong 8 misunderstood fiancés out of 10. Not a perfect episode, but very, very good. Now let's move on to Orville New Horizons, and this is where things are going to get very interesting. I had suspected that the release time of this episode of Strange New Worlds was closely tied, and with great awareness, to the release of the new first season premiere of Orville. To defend themselves, Star Trek's like, hey, we can be funny, but instead, everyone flipped the script on me. The Star Trek episode wasn't as funny as I thought it would be. It played it safe, which was good. The Orville episode was almost entirely unfunny. So we can kind of see the origins of Orville and where the inspirations really came from, because in the Fox version, Seth MacFarlane sold it to Fox under the auspices of it being just a comedy, just another Family Guy for Fox to sell. But that's not what Seth MacFarlane wanted. He wanted to make a new generation of the next generation, the next generation. And so he had this kind of tension between the two things that he had to bridge, which made the tone and the pace of Orville always in first season and most of second season incredibly awkward and jilted. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed the show, but it had its problems. Now here we are, starting season 3, and apparently Seth MacFarlane has a lot more creative control and can truly execute his vision. Now, I know we are definitely getting back to the jokes and stuff, but he came in and hit us hard with this first episode. We are tackling deep social issues that we did not expect the Orville to go on. We have a long, well over 1 hour episode to get us started. We start out with an emotional battle scene, and by the end we are tackling psychological issues of prejudice and suicide that we did not expect to happen. Was it all perfectly well executed? No, it was not. Now that Orville has a much higher budget, it becomes unfortunately apparent that Seth MacFarlane isn't really that experienced of a live-action director. He was perfectly fine for the first 2 seasons of Orville, and he is being advised by Jon Favreau, but while I'm watching this, the whole time I'm thinking, what would this have been like if Jon Favreau had actually directed this episode with this budget, with this script? And so this show comes off as like a super high budget Stargate SG-1, and honestly, one of the biggest factors in that for me is the score. The score is so generic, and it is just not good. Now, when it comes to the polish and the overall production values, it is getting pretty close to Strange New Worlds and the new Trek, which is shocking because those shows, for all their faults, their production values most of the time are just sky high. And so all of a sudden they take this huge jump forward in Strange New Worlds that brings them almost on par with the production values of Star Trek, which is kind of crazy because Orville in many ways was almost a parody, kind of a campy version of Star Trek. And now it's like trying to go head to head. We've got Star Trek being funny and Orville trying to tackle serious social issues. It's like they Freaky Friday'd the 2 shows together. What the heck? But how did it ultimately all play off? Well, let's get in a little closer with the nitty-gritty there. They did not well execute, again, the tonality of the show. It went up and it went down, it went kind of in the middle. There was a lot of stuff that was playing just quasi-serious, and because of our past association with Orville, it was hard to know how to take that stuff. And then the serious stuff, a lot of the time it was well earned, unlike a lot of the serious stuff in Discovery and Picard, because we have so much water under the bridge with these characters, and we have so much scar tissue from the Kaelon War. We know that these people have been hurt. They're not just hurt for no reason, for some airy-fairy backstory. These are things that we saw happen. We know that there is damage in these characters. It's not just something made up to try to make these characters complicated. They don't bemoan the issue too much, but it is one of the major themes of this episode, and so they have to touch on it. They have to dive into it. And they did. In the end, especially with regards to the conversations on suicide, they really undercut themselves by the fact that they do bring him back. Isaac comes back from the dead. I know they wouldn't have been able to keep the secret, but it would have been better if he had been gone for more than a few minutes in the episode. If he had been gone for maybe half the season, then we could have dealt with the repercussions and the emotional aftermath of that a lot better. It's a lot like in Zack Snyder's Justice League. We have the death of Superman, but it's almost an afterthought. It gets shoved under the rug, and next thing you know, he's back. When, in actual fact, Superman's doomsday and the death of Superman, one of the main, most important parts of that story is how the world reacts and deals with that death. And in the same way, we have that happen, but we don't have time to truly process the ramifications of what happened. And so it really undercuts a lot of the impact of this episode. This is a tough one. I keep going back and forth on it, but I'm going to give Orville Season 3, Episode 1, an 8.5 resurrected robots out of 10. Yep, I'd put it just slightly ahead of Strange New Worlds. Now that is because Orville brought their A game for this episode. I doubt that there will be any more episodes of Orville in this season, with the exception of possibly a season finale, that will be working this hard to do this well. Whereas this episode of Strange New Worlds, sure, it was fun, but this wasn't an episode where they were like, man, we're gonna get an Emmy for this one. That wasn't the one. So I'm comparing two very different episodes in intention, but at the same time, two episodes that we have to compare one another because it feels like they refer right back to each other. And what did you think about this episode of Strange New Worlds, Spock Amok, and the new episode of the Orville New Horizons? Did you think one was better than the other? Do you think it even matters? Because it kind of doesn't. What do you think about them both coexisting? Because originally Orville was created in an absolute vacuum of traditional Star Trek, and now we are being bombarded with Star Trek on Paramount+. But what does it all mean? Let me know down in the comments below and I'll get back to you. I would love to talk to you about that. But until next time, I'll catch you later.